Today we have with us Arthur Ganson, an artist and inventor. He has been working on kinetic sculptures since 1977 and his practice beautifully blends engineering with movement.
But at the same time, I had become an art major because pre-med was not a major discipline. I had to declare a major, and I decided to become an art major, still thinking that I would apply to medical school. But in my final few years of college, I started to get really involved in the sculpture that I was making, and eventually just changed courses and decided that I would just forget the pre-med. I became a BFA student, which is a Bachelor of Fine Arts. I stayed for another year, so I was in college for 5 years, and that's kind of how it started. As I said, I like to work with my hands. When my my college courses were very traditional at the time. I was presented with oil painting and figure drawing and bronze casting and things like that, printmaking. One day, I kind of in an accidental way discovered what it was that would lead me to all of this work. And I responded to a 3D design project by putting together a little wire machine. And I don't know what caused me to do it. Actually, it was a joke, because I had taken a biology course, and as I had to do a project for my biology course, and kind of as a joke, I did this thing where I would test the metabolic rate of houseflies by gluing them onto a pinwheel and putting them in different temperature environments, and I would clock how fast they would fly in circles because they were tied to a little pinwheel. So anyway, not a very scientifically rigorous project, but it was, what it did lead was to this thought that one of my first projects out of wire was a little vehicle that I called a fly car. And I had this imagination, if I can have flies turning a pinwheel, then maybe I could take some flies and have them power a little vehicle. Like they would be the motor.
Yeah.
So I put together a little fly car, and it was a little thing out of wire that I soldered together. It was no longer than like that, maybe about 6 inches long. I'm speaking inches here, so people can convert it in centimeters. My mind, even though I'm still using metric, my brain thinks in inches. So I put together a little fly car, and it was a very simple mechanism. And then there was something about that process that compelled me to keep going. And I started to invent all kinds of mechanisms using the material of wire. And years later, I can look back at that time and I can see, now I know what I was doing. I was responding to a lot of the things that were really important to me, and I was coming up with a new way of bringing these different parts of me together.
Yeah.
And there were primarily 3 different aspects that came together for me, and I can see that now. The part of me that wanted to be a surgeon, that was the part of me. I love working with my hands in very focused, delicate ways.
Yeah.
So I started to make wire sculptures where I was challenging my physical manipulation of materials. I'm working with my hands in a very focused way. So that satisfied the part of me that wanted to be a surgeon. And also, I didn't mention earlier, but I was totally in love with computer programming when I was in high school. And this was long before anybody had a personal computer. My high school had a teletype machine, which was, do you know what that teletype machine is?
No, I don't.
Okay, a teletype machine was basically an automatic typewriter, and the what we would do is, because we didn't have a computer in my high school, what we would do is we would take the phone from the teletype machine, and we would literally dial up the computer that was in another state. That was in Dartmouth College, New Hampshire. So from Bloomfield, Connecticut, we would dial up and connect with a computer in New Hampshire, and that was how we communicated with the computer. And at that point, the only communication was basically automatic type of the machine. There was no screen involved. And the programming, I learned to program BASIC, and the programs were stored on rolls of yellow tape. So they were basically punched holes in yellow tape. So in order to run a program, we had to call up the computer, and we would listen and realize, okay, now it's there, and we put it down on the teletype machine, and then I would put my tape through, and it would upload the program, and then it would process, come back with any errors or whatever, or resolve the program, and then it would spit out the results of the teletype machine. So that was the world of programming for me. I totally loved it. It was really captivating. So when I started to make kinetic sculpture, one thing that I started to do was put together sort of complex mechanical systems. And that was the part of me that loved to program. I could be a programmer, but in this case, I was a programmer in three-dimensional space with mechanical components.
Makes sense.
So that satisfied that part of me. Then the third part that I could talk about was the part of me that felt inclined to be an artist, and somebody who would make art as a way of expressing emotions and feelings. For me, that was the goal. So when I was making these very fragile machines, in a way, I was making, I was creating myself, the fragility of my own being. I was making pieces that were really about my sensitivity, my frailty, my curiosity, my wonder, my playfulness. So in many ways, I see all the sculptures really as examples of my humanity.
That's really beautiful. I think I have a couple of questions just based on what you said. The first is, you talked about the teletype machine and how you were interested in like programming and using the computer, but the way you described it is like extremely analog. So has that also kind of carried over in your kinetic sculptures? Because like if you look at programming right now, it's all really digital. It's all on like one machine. But when you look at when I look at your sculptures, at least, there's a very like visceral sense of this thing that exists in the real world, and you can see all the moving parts in it. So was that something that like was the fact that you coded in that way and programmed in that way something that cognizantly affected the way that you created those sculptures?
I think that the fundamental impulse in me to want to put together logical systems was what carried into the making of the sculpture. And when I was programming, I always had a feeling that, this program is either elegant or not. And I was always wanting to make a program that was elegant, that maybe could perform some action or solve a problem in a way that was as simple as possible. So I think those tendencies they carry through in my sculpture making. With every sculpture, there are, first of all, the way they happen is that I'll have some kind of a random idea, and I'll be, depending on, and the ideas happen in many different ways. So I can see an object, and if I find an object, pick up an object, and it may trigger a little miniature dream about that object, and or I can be thinking about something conceptually, and I'll think, oh, this could be a very interesting subject for a machine.
Mm-hmm.
So they happen in all different ways. At the beginning, there's literally an infinite number of manifestations for that machine, and it often takes a long time to kind of find my way to it. Another thing that I could mention as a strong influence, when I was in college, I also did some puppetry. And I was part of a traveling puppet truck in my last 2 years of college. And I would go around with 2 other people on this truck, and we would, first of all, we made all the puppets, and we wrote all the skits, and then we would go around in different states in the Northeast and perform puppet shows in the afternoon for kids. And it was great. So puppetry is one of the fundamental, foundational things for me. And I had a profound experience. At one point we went from college down to see a puppet show at a place called the Puppet Show Place in Boston, and there was a puppeteer named Bruce Schwartz, and he performed a little show called The Little Magic Girl, and he was performing with a rod puppet. Now, I can explain what that is. Basically, a rod puppet is a very simple puppet where you hold the neck of the puppet with one hand, and then in your other hand you have 2 rods that go into the hands of the puppet. So with control of the 2 hands and the neck, a puppeteer can have complete control over the gestures of a little puppet. So Bruce was sitting there at a table in this darkened room, and he performed The Little Magic Girl. And the movement, the gestures of The Little Magic Girl were so perfect and so beautiful that Bruce Schwartz disappeared. He was gone because all attention was on the puppet. Even though he was sitting there physically, it didn't matter.
Yeah.
In a way, that was a great lesson for me, because it was so much about theatrical focus.
Yeah.
And to consider that kind of focus, and that has always been a part of the sculptures, where the sculptures, they're machines, they're, in some ways, they're mechanical puppets. There's the whole world of automata that is an aspect of what I do. It's not exactly what I do, but it's very related. It's theater. Bruce Schwartz showed me the importance of theatrical focus. And I'm thinking, when I made the piece Thinking Chair, which is a little chair walking around the surface of a stone, so much of that piece was designed when I was very conscious of where is the focus, where's the emotional visual focus of this moment of theater, and it had to be this little chair walking around. So that was the starting point, say, for that piece. I didn't know, I knew how I wanted the chair to walk.
Yeah.
I knew with what kind of gesture. I made a little model of the chair first, and so I could physically walk with it with my hands before I made the sculpture, and that taught me about the speed. And once I knew how quickly I wanted it to walk and how I wanted it to walk, then the rest of the machine then evolved from that. And in one sense, you could say all of the particular decisions about particular mechanical interactions, everything came came from those first assumptions that I would have a stone, I would have a little chair, I would have, and I wanted the mechanism to say be visible, but beneath and below the stone as much as possible. So, yeah.
That makes a lot of sense. I've also heard, I've also read you describe yourself as a choreographer, and I can see that when you are describing a process with a chair and with puppets, because it is like a performance. When you look at the work, it moves and moves in a certain way. It's extremely beautiful, visually. Are there any specific materials or techniques or specific movements you've found that you're very drawn to within your sculpture over the years that you've been working on them?
Well, let me see, certainly I fell in love with wire early on.
Yeah.
As a material, because I could both make mechanical components and also do line drawings in space. Essentially, every wire sculpture is its own line drawing in space. And then, of course, that kind of relates to, I was very, very much in love with Calder's circus. He was a beautiful example of somebody who could make very simple things and make them move. And anyway, so wire became the primary material for a long time, but it wasn't the only material. After many years of working with wire, I started to have ideas for sculptures that were not, the idea would not be appropriate to be manifested in just wire. So I had to start using other materials, like wood and larger pieces of steel. And when I first started, I also felt like I wanted the observer to power the piece. I wanted the observer to touch the piece. I wanted there to be no barrier, or as little barrier as possible, between the observer and the sculpture. So I would mostly power them with little hand cranks.
Yeah.
So the observer would have to come in and touch it.
Mm-hmm.
And then anything happening in the sculpture was energetically part of the observer's body, in a sense. The sculpture became an extension of the viewer. So that was really important in the beginning. Everything evolves, of course. Then I started to have ideas for pieces where the rate of motion, the speed at which something moved, as I was talking about
with the chair,
the little thinking chair, that's powered by motors, because in that case, it was really important to have the chair walking at a very particular pace. So, okay, well, this one needs to be driven by a motor. No longer is the observer touching it, but how fast it would move, the gesture, and sometimes just a slight change in speed.
Yeah.
Of something, the way something moves is really important. I've recently been working on machine with a wishbone, and I changed a number of components, and it's walking a little faster. The version I have here, it's walking a little faster than I want it to be walking. Just slightly. It has a little bit of a frenetic energy. So that's something that I'm going to change.
Makes
to
sense.
just slow it down a little bit.
Makes sense.
So I'm very sensitive to those kinds of things, all of the details of how something moves, and also the sounds of a sculpture. I've rarely, only a few times, made a piece of sculpture where sound is the primary focus of the piece, like Machine with Eggshells, where you turn a crank and a series of, I think there were 5 or 6 different eggshells would clack against each other, creating a kind of some sense of digital sound pattern, and if you think that if sound continues on to the ends of the universe, then I'm creating a kind of a strange abstract Morse code that's being sent out in the form of eggshells clapping. Just kind of a fun thought. But in that case, sound was very important. Most of the time, the sounds of the sculptures are really just a result of the particular mechanical reactions. And sometimes, if something is making too much noise, I'll have to change the design of it to quiet something down. But usually, whatever the natural sound of the piece is okay. I can go in many different directions. The thought that I had before we started was in terms of interpretation. And I think it's an important thing is that all of these sculptures begin with a somewhat clear idea of what I want to make and say, even though with all of them there's an evolution where I'll have an abstract idea before anything is made physically, and I'll begin to make it. Sometimes the path of the sculpture will change based on what the real world is telling me, how the materials are responding. So I'm listening a lot. It's a dialogue between my imagination and the real world.
Definitely.
The beautiful thing is that the real world is always honest. The physical materials will not lie. They will move how they will move. So I can't pretend. So I can have an idea for something, like Corey's yellow chair. This little chair that's continually exploding and imploding. Well, when I had the imagination for that piece, what I saw in my mind was that the chair was that a little chair would explode instantaneously with infinite speed. And the pieces I saw in my mind flying to the far edges of the universe, where slowly a gravitational field would cause them to slow down to the point where gravity would begin to bring them back together again, and to the point where they would approach infinite speed, stop instantaneously for just a moment. There's a chair, and then instantaneously they're gone.
That's beautiful.
So that's the imagination. That was the first imagination in my mind, which obviously you can't do. You can't make things move instantaneously with infinite speed. The mind can do it. So this is the beautiful thing. When I started to put that sculpture together, I was so disappointed because not that it wasn't moving instantaneously or with infinite speed, but when the pieces came together, it was a slight bit of vibration because of the way they were sculpting. Very slight vibration, and I was so focused on that, and I first thought, oh my God, this piece is a total failure. But I started to show it to people, and nobody noticed what I was noticing, so I thought, okay, it'll be acceptable for now. I'm still working on that sculpture though, so it was not fully acceptable, and I can talk about that a little bit later, about next evolution of that sculpture. But what I did want to talk about was interpretation, because all the sculptures, as I said, begin with some idea that I have about expressing or encompassing a feeling in an object moving in a certain way. And that's it's got to be based on something that I feel inside. It is definitely not random. There are artists that put things together randomly and see what they come up with. I am not that kind of artist. I have to start with a focused idea and begin to work toward it. That being said, once the machine is done, once it's out there, it's nothing more than a collection of mechanical things in space. And an observer will 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 look at it and interpret it in an infinite number of ways based on the observer's life experience, on their point of view,
Yeah.
on the context, on their emotional state, taking everything into account. And that's really important to me, that there's no right answer, there's no correct interpretation for any of the sculptures. And when I talk about that, I'll often say that the sculptures start from an infinitude of possibilities in my own being, and they get reduced to a very simple collection of finite mechanical substance. It's a very simple mechanical substance that takes some form, and then it's observed, and then it then goes into the infinite possibilities of the observer's being. And that is the whole cycle for me. It goes from infinite to concrete to infinite.
That's really beautiful.
So
Yeah. I'm so sorry. I think you said that everything starts out with a very specific feeling, and that makes a lot of sense because you described how you need things to be a certain way, and you can only have that if you start out with something very specific. I just wanted to ask, are there any specific themes that you're drawn to as well, along with the idea of feeling? Because I've seen your work, and it focuses on a variety of different like things in terms of the themes, right? So I think he and she, to me it felt like it was very much about relationships. It was a very cheeky piece, especially because it was a hand crank. So I think that was saying something very interesting. Machine with Wishbone, I think the description talked about continuity, and Brownie and Rice, it talked about motion. So I've seen the work having a multitude of themes. Is this something that you think about retrospectively? Is this something that you start with, or that except the idea of the feeling, are there specific objects that you use to evoke certain themes, or is that more of a thing that comes later on in your process?
I don't feel like there are any particular themes that I feel connected to.
Mm-hmm.
That's not something that I really think about, because I feel like all of the sculptures are in a sense totally unique, and they're all, even though there are commonalities, there are similarities, but conceptually they all feel pretty different. I can see how I'm drawn to things moving slowly, because things moving slowly offer a lot of opportunity to create evocative motion, but I wouldn't call that a theme. So I think the word theme is something that I don't connect with.
Yeah.
But there are certainly lots of parallels in all of the sculptures, and one of those is the use of the yellow chair, which occurs in a bunch of pieces, even though it's used. Let me see. In Thinking Chair, the little yellow chair is walking, and in that case, it was basically a puppet standing in for me, because that piece originally happened when I was walking my dog in the woods north of my studio, and there was a particular rock outcropping that I would go to on our path, and I would get to this rock outcropping, and I would just walk in circles around this rock outcropping, and it was my own little moment of meditation. At one point I looked down and I saw a stone there, and then in a flash I imagined machine thinking chair. That I imagined that piece. But of course I didn't want to make a little mini Aurthur walking, because that would be way too literal and not offer the possibility for infinite possibilities. So so I decided I would use a little yellow chair. It just seemed like the right object. And Corey's yellow chair is another example of that chair. That was the first piece that I made with that chair.
Yeah.
My son, Corey, who now goes by Cat, and he had a little yellow chair in my studio, and I looked over at it, and I imagined in my mind, the chair exploding up and out, and I already described what I was imagining. So that was the first piece, perfect use of the little yellow chair. Then I think, let me see, there's another one. What else did I? Oh, well, maybe I didn't use that chair. Machine with chair was also a piece that involved a chair. In this case, it was a kind of a Victorian bentwood chair that a machine would come up with and lift it up and move it out of the way. One thing I could say about the use of chairs and about the use of objects in general is that I find that if there are aspects of the machine, I'll put it this way, there's a kind of an edge between clarity and ambiguity. I like to talk about this edge, where something is at the same time crystal clear and at the same time totally ambiguous. So if the sculpture encompasses both absolute clarity and absolute ambiguity, I feel like that is a good stepping off point for an observer to dream into it, because they're not being told what it is.
Definitely.
They're being presented with enough information to then create their own dream. If something is perhaps way too abstract with too much disparate parts, then there may not be enough to coalesce in the mind of the observer to then generate the impulse to want to dream into it. So there needs to be enough clarity to dream into it, but then it's never completed in the sculpture. It's always completed in the mind of the observer. So the little yellow chair is walking in circles. Well, what is the little yellow chair walking? Well, this little chair that's exploding and imploding, or a machine that's flipping the chair over. Chairs are perfect. Is the perfect object to use because people have a lifelong relationship with a chair. It's not an unknown object. It's a known object, and not only is it known mentally, it's also known physically in the body, and that's important. So people have a physical experience with this object. So when I do something with this object that people know so intimately in any form, then that becomes the perfect catalyst for dreaming. Because the purpose of doing all this is to really create objects that people can dream into and
Definitely
create their own story.
That makes a lot of sense. And I think with chairs, it's also like, most definitely, I think it's like you see a chair as a space for a person to occupy. So it very literally is just a place for where you can reflect yourself and you can imagine yourself in it. But you talked about how like your work kind of exists at the edge of like ambiguity and specificity, and also about how like the commonalities in your work kind of come from just the way that objects move and the fact that like you use certain objects and come back to them. Do you also think like perhaps the fact that you are using this kind of similar mechanisms for each of your works and like create this kind of commonality, and like aid themselves to the feeling. You talked about how like slow movement allows for just people to think. So is using mechanical tools and just mechanical objects in and of itself something that you think evokes certain feelings that you wanted to?
Let me see if I understand the question. I think in general, I was always drawn to using mechanics to, like, when I was initially studying art in college, nothing presented to me was mechanical.
Yeah.
Everything was basically static. And I think I was drawn to mechanical things in general because I was never interested in any particular material per se. I didn't really care about the material. To me, it was irrelevant. I was always more interested in something becoming something, what something could be in a transition from one state to another.
That makes sense.
So, and maybe it's also just a reflection on my own being that I am. I just lost your video screen. Are you still there?
I'm so sorry.
Hello?
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Can you see me?
So
I'm so sorry. I think my net went out. Yeah.
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 Okay. I was.
You were talking.
I think just naturally drawn to mechanics because it was the closest way of me maybe recreating my own being. And this is going on. I mean, everything that's going on in the world now with robotics, AI, it's like the human is obsessed with recreating itself. And in a sense, I'm no different. I mean, I started doing it a long time ago in a very simple, naive way. But I think the role of mechanics is that it's then a reflection of my own mortality. The law is if it moves, it'll break. That's the law. So every one of my sculptures, no matter how well I make it, they will stop working at some point. And because the sculptures, the essence of the sculpture is in how it's moving, I know that all of my sculptures will eventually completely die and fail. And unless there's some residual documentation, they will be gone, which is fine. You know, it's
Has that happened yet? Like with any sculptures that you've made? Because you've been working on them for 40 years. So.
Oh yes, oh yeah. There are many pieces that have died. I'm always having to work on them. I'm always having to fix them.
Yeah.
If there are pieces that I want to keep working, and it's very interesting how, like, I've had so many sculptures exhibited for so many years at MIT, and it's incredible when something has been working for like 20 years or 25 years, the like how things wear out, the weak points that are become apparent. I've had a number of pieces, I've had to redesign parts because when I first built them, I didn't know that after thousands of repetitions, this particular part would wear out.
Yeah.
So those things reveal themselves over time. What was I going to say? Ask me another question. I had a thought.
I hate when that happens. Uh,
It was a related thought, but there's so many things to think about and talk about. It'll come to me.
I think it's very interesting that you talk about how like sculpture is very related to mortality, and I think in the beginning you talked about how there are reflections of yourself and like your humanity. So it's basically like the sculptures are like the existence of the sculptures is very directly related to yourself, because you're the only one that can fix them and work on them, and then they're only yours. So I thought that was really interesting as well. I wanted to know, how has the process, the the process of creating these sculptures and the way that you've thought about them changed and evolved over like the 40 years you've been working on them. So I know that you influenced the sculptures and like that as well, but how has the process influenced you, I guess?
That's a great question. And I could start off with the thought that I forgot that just came to me because it applies to what you just asked. And when I first started to make them out of wire, I only knew about putting wire together, soldering wire together, because I made a little electronics project when I was in high school. So I knew how to tin that solder, electrical solder. So the first sculptures that I made were all put together with those materials, with wire, but with soft solder, tin that solder, which is what's used in electronics. I didn't know that it was so soft that parts that had force on them, pressure on them, would eventually break. So a lot of the early sculptures, there were parts, if there was too much stress, they would just naturally fall apart. So I had to start fixing those, and of course that led to rethinking my soldering, and I have to do a better job putting this together. So that the initial change was tin lead solder. It was silver solder.
Yeah.
Which was much more permanent. So I stopped using tin lead solder. I started using silver solder, much stronger. It still took a while for me to really respect the materials well, because part of me, I just didn't care about the materials. Once it started to move, I was done, right? So very often I wouldn't even bother to clean the soldering flux off of the wire.
Yeah.
And then I would spray paint them, and then over time the flux would kind of bleed through the paint, because I was just generally really sloppy with the early pieces.
Yeah.
It's like, no, I gotta be more careful. So for quite a while I was using stainless steel wire. Actually, when I first started to make the pieces, the only wire I used was little bits of fine wire that I would find. Where did I even get that? But a lot of the wire were coat hangers.
Oh.
I mean, wire coat hangers. And I would collect wire coat hangers, and I would actually take a file and scrape the paint off of the wire coat hangers, and I would use that. You would think that I would actually have found a better source for wire, but for many years I was just using coat hangers because they were free.
Yeah.
Eventually, I found my way to using these 3-foot-long pieces of about meter-long pieces of stainless steel wire, and also regular coated steel wire that are used for TIG welding, because I learned how to weld in college. So when I learned how to weld, then that opened up the possibility of working on a larger scale, not just in a very fine way with delicate wire, but with larger parts. And then things just always evolve. There was always a wire component, and as I said, it was like I was first powering everything with hand cranks, but once I started to use motors, then that introduced other things that were important. When I started to, some pieces that I started to make needed real gears as opposed to my wire gears, because they just wouldn't work well enough with my wire formed gears. So that led to understanding actual gears and the technology and how to properly use those, which just require other kinds of building techniques. After many years where I was hand bending all of the wires, I got to a point where I wanted to make that process more efficient, so I invented a little bending tool, which I have. Let me see. I think I have that on my website, a section of bending wire gears, where I just built a little template that allowed me to pretty quickly bend up a duplicate of a wire gear if I knew all the settings. And in this case, in order to create a new gear, I would start off with a little bit of trial and error, and I could very quickly find the settings for the tool. And once the settings were there, I would record in a little book what wire I used, what pin settings, and I could then duplicate that gear exactly in the future. So I had my own gear catalog that I would work from. Yeah. And I could still do that. I still have all those parts if I want to remake any of those wired gears. I know how much wire to use, what the pin settings are. And I also really love the process of hand bending the gears. For a while when I was a kid, I was knitting. I love just sitting there and working with my hands and knitting. And in a way, making wire gears is kind of like knitting. You can sit there and manipulate something. It's very satisfying. But lately I have not been making many wire gears because the process has evolved, and to be like really current, because you were asking about the evolution of the process. Right now, I'm working on what may be a final version of Corey's yellow chair. Oh. This little exploding and imploding chair that I talked about. There were aspects of that piece I said that I was never really happy about. I mean, the piece works and it communicates the idea, but there is an aspect to it that is not elegant in the way that I want it to be. In that there is a considerable amount of the mechanism of that piece that is hidden behind a plywood backboard. So I'm only showing part of the machine, and I do like to show all of the machine. In that case, I had to. There were so many things that were visually annoying. I decided I would just show the final arms and the chair. So that's one aspect that I was not happy about. That there's this mystery, and I don't like the machines to be a mystery. I don't want them to be magic tricks. It's really important that everything, if possible, be visible. Yeah. That just feels really important. So I'm working on another version of Corey's yellow chair, where there will be, it'll be designed very differently mechanically. There's some similarities in that the final arms that pivot and hold the chair, those will be the same, but actually on the wall behind me, right there, that is um, an example of a kind of gear, a ring gear, that will be central to the new piece.
Makes sense.
Now, I made a prototype, a very large prototype of the new piece a few years ago, and it basically works, and there's still an evolution of that. So I'm gonna go back here. And this is a large gear. This is a large ring gear. It is, and there's no central axle to the gear, because in this opening, this is where the chair will come together. And the bearing, there will be 6 bearing points for each ring gear. And the arms will all be running off that ring gear.
That makes sense.
You can see that. But it's so funny that that's on the wall there. That was part of an unfinished version, and I made that gear based on sort of traditional tooth-shaped gear, tooth-shaped profiles that I replicated with a router, because that material is called MDF. It's medium density fiberboard. So it's not a fantastic material. It's not a long-term material. But all of the gears that I made for the prototype, they worked, but they're not really accurate enough. The final version of this piece will need to have gears that are very accurate, and they will need to be machined with tools that I don't have. They need to be like fluid, the way clockwork gears have that kind of accuracy. So I'm beginning to work on this piece, and I'm designing it in the 3D modeling space. I'm using Fusion 360, which is a beautiful program. I know just a little bit about it, but enough enough to create the piece. And I have a 3D printer, which is accurate enough for me to print prototype pieces. So after a lifetime of bending wire and soldering wire and welding steel and cutting wood, this is a whole other new wonderful exploration for me, is to manifest this sculpture with these completely new materials. So I'm in that process, and the 2 things I want to say about it. One is that it's so exciting because whenever I needed a real gear, and these are actually manufactured gears as opposed to my wire gears, whenever I needed a real gear, I would have to go to a catalog, and then I would have to decide from the number of options. They give you gear tooth profiles or numbers of teeth. And anyway, now I literally have an infinite gear catalog, and every aspect of the gear, the number of teeth, the size of the teeth, the shape of the webbing, the thickness of it, every aspect is infinite. Right now I have an infinite possibility of designing these machines in ways I never had before. It's very, very exciting.
Very wonderful.
One thing I don't know is when this piece is completed, how it will feel, because it's not hand-built. There's something about hand-built objects which have a kind of a warmth and a humanness. So it won't have that. It won't have except maybe the chair. Maybe I'll hand build the chair itself, the little chair pieces. So there's that unknown. When something is not fully hand-built, it carries a different kind of energy. Now, while I'm saying that, there are other pieces that I have made that are not hand built, and they seem to communicate okay, like a machine with concrete that evolved into beholding the Big Bang. That is, those machines involved motors and wheel gears and concrete, and even though I hand put everything together, there's no relic, or there's no trace of my physical hand putting it together.
Makes sense.
So perhaps they're a bit colder, they're a bit more intellectual.
Yeah.
I think maybe the pieces, maybe the wire pieces will always have a kind of a human warmth.
Yeah.
That something that's manufactured with a tool simply can't have.
Yeah. But I feel like it's like an eternal trade-off people keep making, and it's just the way that like your process is evolving, and it's like both versions and like different versions of the same chair can exist, and I think that's really beautiful. And I think you also talked about how in the beginning you were like not as prone to just like looking to the details and like cleaning up, and now you've like refined your process quite a bit as you've been doing this, and I think that's really beautiful. Just a last couple of questions. First is that what are you like working on right now? What do your other projects look like? So I know that you organize this like competition called like Fridays with Thanksgiving at MIT. I think I just wanted to know how that came about, because it seems really interesting, and it's just inculcating like such like immense creativity and community within engineering and STEM, which you don't like usually see, and I thought that was super duper interesting. So could you talk a little bit more about that? And also I read that you're working with your wife on like creating like utilitarian sculptures and objects, so both of those things seemed really interesting, and I would just like to know more.
Sure. So the Friday after Thanksgiving event that ended up, it was the MIT Museum. I started to show my sculpture there, and I just, it was very well received, and they just decided they wanted to keep showing it. So I became kind of a artist in residence at MIT for a while, both in the Office of the Arts and at the MIT Museum.
Mm-hmm.
So I've had a really long association with the MIT Museum. Their sculptures are still there. There are some sculptures still there. Not as many are being shown at the moment. That may change in the future. Whatever. But many years ago, they had a program called Friday After Thanksgiving, which they started independent of me, and they would do something on the day after Thanksgiving for people who didn't want to go shopping on the day after Thanksgiving, as an alternative for something to do on that Friday. Yeah. And one year they asked me, do you have any ideas of what we could do? And I had recently seen the most amazing video artwork by these two German artists, Peter Fischli and David Weiss.
Yeah.
And I don't know if you're familiar with it. It's called they did a piece called The Way Things Go. And everybody should see this. And basically it is a mechanical, chemical chain reaction that they put together in some warehouse. I think they're Swiss, so somewhere in Switzerland, I think. And I was just captivated by it, because it was another thing where you got a sense of the flow of energy that was moving and transforming and evolving in all different ways, and it was just so beautifully done. So I thought, oh, well, that could be really cool to have a chain reaction.
Yeah.
And so I suggested that, and we put it out to the community, and we invited families and school groups to create sections of a chain reaction. And in order to make one long chain reaction and to practically happen in one day, we had to have some way of knowing that we could connect everybody's work to each other, because it wasn't a situation where all these people would come together and build the whole thing at the same time. It was impractical in this particular setting. So we said, um, I came up with this simple idea of a pull string, and that you should start your chain reaction by pulling a string a certain distance with a certain force, and then end your chain reaction by pulling a string the same distance with the same force. You can do anything you want in between, as long as you do the start and end, and then we can just tie the strings together, and it will be one continuous flow. So I don't know how many groups started the first year. Maybe there were 10 groups or something, and we did it in the hallways of the MIT Museum, the old space, and it was great fun. It was very hard to see because we're in the hallways, so you could only watch one part of it. And I remember the first years we did it a number of times. So, but it was a lot of fun. We decided to do it again. We also did it in the hallways the next year, but then it started to get too crowded. So we moved to a room in the basement, and more people got involved. And eventually we had to move the whole thing to the small gymnasium on campus at MIT. And then more people got involved, and we ended up moving to the large gymnasium. And we ended up, it just became this really fun event that would happen, where we had, families would come in, and it evolved over time, like everything evolves. And it got to a point where people would show up and they had like 2 to 3 hours to set it up. And at a certain point, I would begin to do a video tour. I have to say the video tour before we actually ran the chain reaction was the most fun in a way, because I got to talk with all of the kids and the parents and the teachers, and they would describe what they did and why they did it and what was supposed to happen. Of course, very few things actually happened the way they're supposed to happen, which didn't matter at all. It never really mattered, because it was really all in the spirit of invention, of creativity, of exploration. So the beautiful thing about that is that it's just making chain reaction elements is just one wonderful problem-solving event. And now there are so many amazing chain reactions on the web. Actually, a friend of mine sent me a link to another one that she just saw that I haven't seen yet, that is, I'm sure, totally amazing. And there are people, I mean, I'm like a novice chain reactor. I mean, I can make things, but maybe I don't have the kind of focus and patience that a lot of people do, where they just, spend days and days and days doing these incredible things. So the chain reaction was a really wonderful thing, and then we stopped it the year COVID happened. It just became totally impossible. But also, I was a little bit burned out after doing it for about 20 years. And for me, the day after Thanksgiving, when most people are exhausted, it's like I would always make the final event, and I would never be ready in time. So I can't tell you how many years I was like up all night, literally, the day before the chain reaction, and then I was also hosting the event. So it was a little crazy, but certainly a lot of fun. So that was I guess a side thing. I've also, in terms of other things that I've been involved in, I've always been doing some inventing, because making sculpture is all invention. But I have spent a good amount of time inventing practical things too. So many years ago, I invented a toy that the idea is that it would be a flexible foam construction toy. And I got together with a couple of friends, and we followed through, and we created a factory. We created a toy called Tubers and Zots. And we built a factory, and we're selling the toy. We never really made so much money from it, but it was a very interesting experience of selling something like that.
Yeah.
And actually, just 2 days ago, I had a patent submitted for another invention that I've been working on for a while, which is an evolution of the garlic mincer, the ubiquitous garlic mincer, and I think it's the best garlic mincer. It can be the best garlic mincer in the world. So I've been working with a patent lawyer, and 2 days ago it was submitted.
That sounds wonderful.
So I'm very excited about that, about pursuing that. Now, after spending a number of years in the production process, I don't have an interest in actually being the manufacturer of this. So I will be looking to join forces, maybe either license or sell the idea to a manufacturer.
Makes sense.
Like OXO is like my first choice. So, but I haven't started the process yet.
It sounds really exciting. And I feel like coming from a creative background and having like worked with objects for so long definitely like gives you a different perspective when you're inventing things, even if it's consumer objects. But all of this sounds really, really interesting. Thank you so much for like joining me and like sharing your thoughts in such great detail. It was extremely wonderful and insightful to listen to you talk about your process and the work that you've done and are doing.
Well, thank you. Thank you. This has really been an enjoyable conversation. I really appreciate your curiosity and everything that you're doing. And I think I'll be curious to see where you go with your stuff. So please keep me posted, because I think you have a lot of really, really wonderful energy in terms of your curiosity and your explorations. And it's really been fun to talk with you about my little bit of craziness.
No, it's extremely wonderful to hear about all of that.